Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 54. Samuel tucked the box full of paper-thin monitors under one arm and gave the door to the medical wing a quick tap. He was a bit nervous. With everything that had been going on, Sam hadn't really had a chance to talk to Stace since the flirting incident. Hopefully this would help clear the air a little. After hearing a voice on the other side of the door, Samuel entered and, damn! He stopped and stared, feeling his face heat up a little. You okay, Sam? Stace sounded concerned, and the sound of his voice snapped Samuel out of his little half-trance. Yeah, I never realized how tall you are. Stace was standing, completely upright for the first time that Sam had ever seen. The man had both of his arms gripping metal bars, trying to hold his balance on one leg, but even hunched like he was, Stace was at least 30 centimeters taller than Sam and broad-shouldered. His body was slowly putting some weight back on, and instead of skeletal, Stace was looking solid. He practically towered over Sam. I guess with the way Ian teases you, I just kinda picture you being smaller. Samuel realized what he said and started to stammer a little. I mean... Stace let out a laugh. Yeah, I forgot it myself. His arms started shaking and a skill helped guide him down to a sitting position on nearby stool. It's weird to be standing. But you're going to be doing a lot more of it. Askel grinned. I predict we can have you on crutches in a week or two. That got Sam thinking. Have you made a decision about, He shrugged vaguely at Stace's missing leg. Yeah. But we can revisit the decision later. Askel chimed in. It's not a permanent thing. I've had one too many panic attacks around the medical professional. Stace smiled, though he looked drained more than happy. Anyway, I don't want any more surgeries. There's so little of me left, and so much has been done. The sound of Stace swallowing filled the small room. I would rather be stubborn and do it the old-fashioned way. That earned Stace a smirk. I figured that would be the answer. Sammy thought you would go full cybernetic, but I think they were just hoping to see you all McCoed. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, Sam wanted to kick himself. Was he trying to hurt his friend? Shit. Sorry. Instead, Stace just nodded with a small smile. It's all right. Now that I made the decision, it doesn't seem quite so scary. The older man gestured to the box Samuel had with him. Should I make the obligatory SE7EN reference? Ha. And here I thought you were a pop cultural void. I brought you some work if you're up for it. He started to unload the box onto a nearby cot. 8 thin flat panel screens and one larger tablet. A stand, like a metal octopus, that could hold all of the screens in a grid. A wireless keyboard and mouse complete with Painter Observatory mousepad. If you want me to fix those, it will take a while. And you'll have to teach me how to do it first. No, it's security work. We're planning to install a couple hundred omnidirectional cameras in the wilderness around the facility. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind assisting. You know better than any Shilvati how animal populations and such move around out there, and if you can access the cameras you can look for blind spots as they are installed. Sort of a third-party review. Stace nodded. I don't mind helping, but will our new security people be okay with someone looking over their shoulder? They're professionals. When I mentioned that we have an Earth wilderness survival expert on site, both Commander REM and Scout Captain Pellick wanted to meet you. I wanted to warn you that REM has a cybernetic lower right arm. Stace let out a small shudder at the words, and Sam was glad that he took the time to come talk to the battered man. The surprise would have been harsh. Thank you for letting me know. Stace took a moment to sigh, then seemed to center himself. Where should we set this up? I was thinking the other half of the conference room where we set up your workshop. It's big enough we can set up a few desks and turn it into a security monitoring office. A few. And there was the panic Samuel was afraid of. He may have been improving, but Stace still had a long way to go. Yeah, it's too big of a job for one person. You'll have to work with some other security folks. Think you're up for it? Only one way to find out, I suppose. Stace nodded to himself and seemed to be steadying his nerves. Mind if I ask you for a favor? The ride down from orbit was far from pleasant, but questing for great truths didn't particularly mind. She was busy trying to figure out the mysteries of the Painter Observatory's server. This was her 20th attempt and so far she hadn't been able to find anything useful. Instead she found herself under attack from an ever-changing array of unique and troubling viruses. Now that she knew what she was facing and had properly armored herself against such attacks, the dear child wasn't in any danger. Still, it was like trying to dance through a minefield. On top of that was the encryption scheme on the data questing for great truths had been able to snag. It was a complex human-generated cipher that had proved difficult to crack. Every time she thought she had it figured out, the resulting data was just another layer of encryption. She took a long drink from her water bottle as the shuttle made its final approach. She had been taxing her inorganic co-processors almost to the point of overheating and as a result found herself almost constantly dehydrated, but she wasn't about to let some primitive human encryption show her up. Questing for great truth stepped out of the shuttle and into the cool morning air. It felt soothing on her gold-flecked skin, and she a moment to pause her decryption routines. If she had to interact with other people, it was going to be important to focus on that. Now, where should she go first? Her orders were to meet with Lieutenant Marion, but her fight with the Painter Observatory server was distinctly human-flavored. That meant finding that Samuel Forsyth Painter person. Now that questing for great truths was in sight, she could access the local security network. Her authentications had already been approved and logs showed he was in the hotel, so that was where her search would start. It was nice to chat with Samuel. While it would take a long time to really become close, Sam seemed more and more comfortable to be around by the moment. Which was definitely a good thing considering Stace wasn't wearing pants. Samuel swung the scanner around the scarred lump of twisted flesh that formed the stump of Stace's lower left leg. The vertical red line of the laser left a tingle in its wake. Stace knew there was no way he could actually feel the light, but the brain does what it does. I really appreciate the help. With the changes to security, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get someone up here to do this. It's no problem, I can even task our printers to make the parts once your prosthetic guy has the design done. It would be better to get him up here to do a proper fitting, but for now we can at least get you started with something. Thanks. Now that I can stand, I'd really like to. The door to the hallway opened and the part of Stace's brain that wasn't in the middle of a full-fledged panic attack seemed to be staring at the newcomer, locking every detail into his memory so he could have nightmares about it later. Her skin was orange, not the orange of a bad fake tan, but actually seemed to be naturally pigmented that way. It was flecked with a heavy dusting of gold, like freckles on her exposed skin. One eye was a brilliant green and the other was covered with a white ceramic lens that obscured the entire socket, its front studded with an array of black glass hexagons. Her hair was short, dark, and spiky but only covered the right side of her scalp. The entire left was bald and showed a delicate gold tracery winding through her skin like a complicated tattoo. She was wearing sleeveless coveralls and her entire left arm seemed to be cybernetic, interlocking silver plates covering the joints. It reminded Stace of a mix of exposed skeleton and medieval armor. Her right arm was real, but the hand seemed to be part mechanical, the middle finger, palm, and back of the hand covered in the same glossy metal. He couldn't see her legs, but, as she stepped into the room, the irregular outline of more cybernetics printed on the fabric of her coveralls. After that, things started to go dark. The horrible feeling building inside his mind gripped him entirely, and he had a vague sense that he was falling. A sharp pain at the back of his skull as it hit the hard floor. Yelling. Then nothing. Well, that was awkward. Questing for Great Truths pulled the video of the last 30 seconds out of her cortical buffer and saved it onto inorganic memory so she could properly analyze it. She had walked in on 3 males. The Helcom, whose security file said he used the nickname Askell, was using an omnipod and not looking towards the door. A small human, crouching and using a 3D scanner on the other human's leg stump, fit the description of Samuel Forsyth Painter. That made the one facing her Eustace Grant. As soon as he saw the Gear Child, he seemed to tense, the pupil of his one human eye flaring as those bizarre natural human combat drugs hit. He looked at her intently, then began to shudder, eventually slipping from his stool. The man's head had hit the floor with a dull thunk and blood started to pool out from under it at an alarming rate. Samuel and Askell were at him in moments, giving her no more attention than for Samuel to yell at her to leave. Why had this happened? Being a Gear Child away from home meant getting stares and rude comments. It was part and parcel of being what she was. Each one of her augmentations was a reminder of the past, something tying her to her family and her culture. That wasn't something that outsiders necessarily understood well. Such a severe reaction, though. The first step was to see what a different visual spectrum could show. She re-experienced the visual feed in ultraviolet, then again in infrared. Cranking up the contrast showed something interesting. The fabric of Eustace's shirt was thin enough that she could see the differences in heat radiating off his body. It was faint, but she could see the Y shape of a huge surgical scar. It wasn't clean and neat, done with the reverence of her own people. This was the quick work of an emergency. The fact that his cybernetic eye didn't match his organic one was another clue. This man had a lot of work done in a very short time frame. Maybe she could deduce some more. While poking around the Earth internet she had come upon an interesting bit of software. It was a phase-based video magnification processing system developed by the human MIT. It overemphasized small motions and color changes in video, making them far easier to discern visually. Questing for Great Truths decided to run the video through these algorithms and see how Eustace ended up. With the deviation cranked up, she could see the human's face flush with each heartbeat. She set a timer and counted, then plotted the deviation. When he saw her, his heart rate increased, but it did so in a smooth curve. Even at an accelerated rate, every beat was consistent. Very consistent. She ran a few other videos she just happened to have of humans doing intense physical activity through the same algorithm, and sure enough Eustace's inhumanly regular heartbeat was an outlier. His heart, at least, wasn't organic. He might be less organic than she was, judging by the size of that scar. So why was he so bothered? The door opened and Samuel Forsyth Painter came out. He was wiping his hands dry on his shirt, and seemed surprised to see Questing for Great Truths waiting for him. "Is that man all right?" "Yeah, just managed to split his scalp on the floor. No concussion, so we got the bleeding stopped with some medical goo, gave him a light sedative, and moved him back to his room. He'll be fine with some rest." She took a moment to get her words in order. "I will never apologize for who and what I am, but I do feel guilty. I shouldn't have barged into a medical ward without even knocking." "Yeah, you shouldn't have." The words stung, but the slight smile on the human's face removed much of the hurt. "But Stace is a bit of a special case. He's uncomfortable with his situation right now. He's like me. I could tell." "Well, don't tell him that. He didn't exactly have a lot of say, and reminding him of it doesn't." Samuel sighed. I shouldn't even be talking about it. It's not my place to say. He then jerked suddenly, his whole demeanor changing as he held out a fist. Oh shit, I didn't even ask your name. I'm Samuel. She returned the fist bump carefully. I am questing for great truths. She waited for the inevitable confusion that all dear child names caused. Nice choice. I like it. Samuel grinned. I may have read up on your people a bit when I heard you were coming. I assume you're the person who has been assaulting our decoy server for the last day. Decoy server. She had seriously been going nuts fighting the wrong server? All that for nothing? Yeah. You might want to check your Omnipod for lurking nasties. We have some rough stuff in there, since the whole point of the server is to mess up people who try to get in. He seemed to notice the look on her face. You didn't use a pad, did you? No. Well, follow me then. I'll show you what you likely infected yourself with. Samuel started walking towards the exit, the little bit of swagger in his step accenting his firm ass. Questing for great truths followed a pace behind, completely giving up on any pretense of keeping her thoughts professional. She would have to come up with a plan for talking to Stace at some point, but for now there was a butt to look at and some virus purging to do. Watching Stace wake up was always a treat. Elora wasn't sure why, but there was just something soothing about watching her man slowly come to his senses, the beautiful smile that filled his face whenever he saw her. It somehow made the world seem small and peaceful. My head hurts. His pale hand moved up to feel the bandage wrapped around his head. It should, you had quite the tumble. A skill had to sedate you. Elora moved over to the bed, sitting down next to Stace so she could put her hands to his face, stroking his beard gently. What do you remember? The panic was there in an instant, but Elora was ready. Her hands held his face and turned him to face her. It's all right, you're okay. He shuddered, but relaxed as Elora's large hands slid back to scritch the back of his head, thumbs rubbing against his cheeks. That was our new security consultant. I should have warned you that she's a dear child, but I honestly didn't think she would be coming here. I didn't want to stress you out. Dear child? I think Askel mentioned them before. His voice sounded weak and husky, but Elora knew then that Stace would be okay. His natural curiosity was starting to come through. I don't know too much about them, they are really rare. Their home planet is very dangerous and part of how they deal with that is through body modification. It's a whole cultural thing. So all that was, intentional. Another shudder racked his body. Some of it. Elora shrugged and let her fingers slowly drift lower, playing along his neck and the hollow of his throat. I think she wrote you a message you can read later when you're feeling better. I don't think I'm up for that right now. Think you might be up for something else. Her hands continued to drift lower, taking a moment to tease across Stace's chest through his thin shirt. His breath came out in a gasp as she gently pinched a nipple. His speech was interrupted with a little yelp as Elora tightened her fingers. I think you know the answer to that. That was one of the many things Elora loved about Stace. He didn't initiate sex too often, but he was pretty much always ready to go. Lately, as his physical therapy had been doing its work, she was starting to see what had the rest of the galaxy in a tizzy about humans. He could be aggressive and take charge when the mood struck him, but right now that wasn't what Elora wanted. You know, I think Aang said something about tying you up so he could have his way with you. I think I'm going to have to show you how it's done properly. Before Stace could speak, she slid her hand up to gently touch his lips. Besides, Askel said you shouldn't move around too much. We have to do what your nurse says. Stace nodded, his tongue slipping free to lick at her fingers. His tongue was so soft. That settled it. Elora leaned against the wall and gave it 3 quick raps. A few moments later, 3 came back. With a skill properly warned, she could go all out and truly wreck her boyfriend. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.